On my wedding day, my sister walked down the aisle in a wedding dress and declared, "He chose me instead." My mom clapped and said, "We knew you'd understand." My groom just laughed and said, "Oh, you have no idea what's about to happen." Then he pulled out his phone and pressed play. I was supposed to have the happiest day of my life. The venue was perfect, a historic mansion outside of Chicago with ivy-covered walls and stained glass windows. My dress? A lace masterpiece my grandmother had saved for me, altered to fit like a glove. Everything was set. I should have known something was off when my mom kept giving me those tight-lipped smiles, the kind that screamed, "Just go along with it." But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The music started. Bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one, pastel dresses flowing. My heart pounded. I was minutes away from marrying the love of my life. Then, just as the processional ended and the guests turned expectantly, something changed. The music cut to silence and my sister Valerie walked down the aisle in a wedding dress. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but no. There she was in a white gown, a smug smile stretched across her face, holding a bouquet. The whispering started immediately. I was frozen in place, bouquet clutched so tightly my fingers ached. Then she opened her mouth. "He chose me instead." I couldn't process it. My sister, my own flesh and blood, stood at the end of the aisle in a wedding dress and said, "He chose me." The guests gasped. Someone audibly whispered, "Oh my God." Then, my mother, my own mother, started clapping. "We knew you'd understand," she said, beaming like this was some kind of sick family reunion. I was shaking. My dad had his head in his hands looking mortified, but he didn't say a word. And then my groom Michael left. Not a nervous laugh, not a confused laugh, but a deep satisfied chuckle. Like he had just pulled off the greatest trick of all time. "Oh, you have no idea what's about to happen," he said. Then he pulled out his phone. "Press play." And everything changed. The room was dead silent. Even the birds outside seemed to pause. Michael held his phone high, his thumb hovering over the screen. He looked at Valerie, then my mother, and then finally at me. His smirk never wavered. "Let's show everyone the truth," he said. Then he hit play. A video started. The screen lit up and the room filled with sound. At first it was just grainy security footage, someone walking into a hotel room. Then another angle, a closer shot, clearer. The person in the video was Valerie. She was smiling, stepping inside. A man was already in the room waiting for her. A man who was not my goal. My mother's face blanched. Valerie's smug smile twisted into something ugly. The video continued. There was no mistaking what was happening. Valerie giggled, arms wrapped around the man's neck. He kissed her and she let him. And then, she spoke. "He's an idiot." Valerie's voice rang out from the phone. "He actually thinks I love him. I'm just keeping him warm until the real deal comes along." The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back actually yelled, "Holy shit." My hands were still shaking, but now with rage. My sister had tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, only for Michael to turn the tables. Valerie spun to Michael, eyes wild. "You set me up?" He lowered the phone. "I didn't have to," he said smoothly. "You did this all on your own." My mother finally found her voice. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, her eyes darting between me and Valerie. Valerie is the one for him. You would have understood eventually." I felt like I was going to throw up, but Michael wasn't done. "Oh, I understand just fine." He tucked his phone back into his pocket and turned to the crowd. "Would you like to hear the best part?" Valerie shrank back, her hands trembling. "Michael, no. Let's tell them," he interrupted. "Let's talk about how your mother helped set this up. How she encouraged Valerie to steal me away. How she convinced her that she was better suited for me because she always thought I was too good for her other daughter." My mother took a step back. Someone in the front row gasped. And then Michael pulled out a second phone. Because of course he had another phone. "You might recognize this voice," he said. Then he hit play. It was my mother. "She's not smart enough for him, Val," my mother's voice said. "She's nice, sure. But you're better. You're meant to be the wife of a man like Michael. She'll get over it." My knees nearly buckled. A cold, sharp laugh tore through the crowd. It came from someone's aunt, maybe a distant cousin, but it spread like wildfire. Then came the murmuring, the shifting, the weight of judgment. Valerie was breathing heavily, her white dress now a mockery of the day. "You knew," she hissed at Michael. "This whole time? You knew and you played along." Michael stepped closer, looking her right in the eye. "I wanted everyone to see exactly what kind of person you are." Valerie's hands clenched into fists. She turned to my mother, eyes wild. "You said this would work. You said she'd accept it." My mother looked ready to faint. "Do you still think I'll get over it?" I said, my voice cold. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then the whispering in the crowd turned into something new. Laughter. Not warm laughter, cruel laughter. People were shaking their heads, whispering to each other, pointing. I didn't know who started clapping, but soon others joined in, not applause but a slow, mocking clap that made my mother physically flinch. Valerie turned red. "Shut up," she screamed. "All of you. This was my day, my moment. You don't understand." Michael cut her off. "Your moment." He gave a short laugh. "Valerie, this is my wedding. You crushed it. You humiliated yourself. You tried to ruin my life. And now you're just a joke." She took a step back, her face a storm of emotions. Then my mother grabbed her arm. "We need to go," my mother whispered, her voice sharp with panic. "No." Valerie yanked away. She looked around wildly, like she could somehow undo everything. "No, I can fix this." She turned to me. "You don't deserve him." I didn't answer. I just looked at her. And I think, in that moment she realized it. She lost. Michael turned to me. "Are you okay?" I wasn't sure, but I was done letting them have power over me. So I took a breath, straightened my spine, and I said, "Oh, I have no idea what's about to happen next." And the room erupted. The laughter, the whispers, the gasps, it was all too much. But I stood my ground. Valerie looked like she was about to combust. My mother was shaking, and Michael was still smirking like this was the grand finale of a play he'd written himself. But the thing about revenge, it doesn't always go the way you plan, because that's when he walked in. The doors at the back of the venue creaked open, and in stepped a man in a dark suit, not part of the wedding, not a guest. He moved with purpose, a phone in one hand, an envelope in the other. His eyes scanned the room before they landed on Michael. The entire crowd turned to watch. Michael's smirk faltered. I didn't know who this man was, but Michael did. "Mr. Wright," the man said, his voice cool and professional. "We need to talk." Michael exhaled sharply. "Not now." The man raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think now is the perfect time." And just like that, the power in the room shifted. Michael, who had been so in control, who had just destroyed Valerie and my mother, suddenly looked cornered. I turned fully to face him. "What's going on?" Michael looked at me, then back at the man. I said, "Not now." The man ignored him. He lifted his phone, hit play, and another recording started. This time it wasn't about Valerie or my mother. This time it was Michael's voice. "Just keep her happy for now," Michael's voice said. "I need her family to like me. Once the business deal is done, I can drop her." The room froze. My stomach dropped. Michael's voice continued. "Her dad is the real target. He's been looking for a buyer, and I need to be in his good graces. Once the ink is dry, I'll make up some excuse to call off the wedding, but I need her completely on my side first." A sharp, choking sound escaped me. Michael was using me? It wasn't real? I looked at him, hoping for something, a denial, an explanation, but all I saw was panic. Pure, unfiltered panic. The man in the suit, whoever he was, paused the recording. "Would you like me to continue?" he asked. Michael lunged for him, but the man sidestepped smoothly, handing the phone off to someone in the crowd, someone who immediately pressed play again. And now, everyone could hear. "I don't even like her," Michael's voice continued. "She's just easy. She trusts too much. Makes her the perfect mark." A stunned silence. Then someone whispered, "Holy shit," and that was it. The room erupted. Gasps, outrage, people turning to me, to Michael, to each other. My father, who had been silent this whole time, stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Michael spun, his face pale. Wait, but my dad was already moving. One punch, a single solid punch to Michael's jaw. Michael collapsed. Screams, shouts. Some people cheered. Others just gawked. And me? I just stood there. My sister had betrayed me. My mother had betrayed me. And now Michael, who I thought was the love of my life, had been playing me this whole time? I felt hollow, empty. I looked at Valerie, expecting her to gloat, but she wasn't. She was staring at Michael with something like shock, maybe even horror. Because in her twisted mind she thought he actually wanted her. She took a step forward. "Michael, you shut up." Michael snapped. He wiped blood from his lips, still on the ground. "You ruined everything." Valerie's mouth snapped shut. I almost laughed. She thought she was the mastermind. Thought she was special. But she was just another pawn. Just like me. And then for the first time I spoke. "You were both using me," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "All this time." Michael sat up, rubbing his jaw. "I was going to tell you I cut him off." "When?" Silence. Valerie shook her head like she couldn't accept it. "But he chose me." Michael laughed, not the charming, confident laugh from earlier. This one was bitter. "Oh please," he said. "You were just convenient." If Valerie looked horrified before, now she looked wrecked. Tears welled in her eyes. "You love me." Michael scoffed. "You were a backup plan. That's all you've ever been." And for the first time I saw it. Valerie wasn't just selfish, she was desperate. She had spent her whole life trying to be the center of attention, trying to prove she was better than me. But now, she wasn't even the main villain in this story. She was just another fool. My mother was still trying to process everything, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. My father was fuming. And me? I looked at my goal, really looked at him. He wasn't the charming, perfect man I had fallen in love with. He was nothing. And then I turned to the man in the suit. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Let's just say, I work for someone who really doesn't like liars." My father's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his face shifting as he read something. Then he looked at my goal and smiled. Something was happening, something bigger, and I had a feeling this wasn't over, not even close. Michael was still sitting on the floor, his lip bleeding, looking furious. My mother hadn't moved, standing stiff like she could still will this moment into something different. And Valerie was shaking. But the man in the suit, the one who had just exposed everything, wasn't finished. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to my father. "This is what you've been looking for," he said. Dad took the envelope with shaking hands. He opened it, scanning the papers inside. His face changed. First confusion, then understanding, and then rage. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice tight. "No joke," the man replied. "Just facts." Dad turned to Michael, his hand curling into a fist again. You were planning to screw me over?" The guests were frozen, watching like they had front row seats to a disaster. I took a step forward, trying to understand. "Dad, what is it?" He didn't answer me. Instead, he held up the papers. Michael paled. "These," Dad said, voice shaking, "are documents transferring my business shares to Michael without my approval." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michael didn't deny it. He just stared. Valerie, still in her stupid white dress, turned to him with wide eyes. "You are after money?" Michael gave a bitter laugh. "What? Did you think I actually wanted you?" I watched her face crumble. This was it, the moment everything shattered. Valerie let out a horrible sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. She grabbed Michael's arm like she could force him to change his mind. "But you love me. You chose me." Michael yanked his arm away. "You were convenient," he spat. "I had to make sure your mom would back me if your dad ever got suspicious. And you were dumb enough to play along." Tears rolled down her face. "You're a monster," she whispered. Michael didn't deny it. "And my mother?" She had the nerve to turn to me and say, "See, this is why we wanted you to step aside. He's ambitious. He has a plan." I laughed. A short, sharp, exhausted laugh. "You're defending him?" I asked. She lifted her chin. Valerie just wasn't careful. If she had played it smarter, this wouldn't be happening. Even Valerie turned to her in shock. "Mom," she choked out. Are you seriously saying this is my fault?" Mom didn't even hesitate. "You should have waited. You pushed too hard." Something inside Valerie snapped. She turned fully to my mother, her shoulders shaking. "I did everything for you," she whispered. "I ruined my relationship with my sister for you. And now that it's falling apart, you're blaming me." For the first time in my life, I saw true pain in Valerie's eyes. She looked at me then. "I'm sorry," she said, voice raw. And I could tell she actually meant it, but it was too late. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my silence heavier than any words I could have thrown at her. She sobbed once, then turned and ran out of the venue. Mom moved to follow her, but Dad stopped her. "We're done," he said coldly. Mom blinked at him. "What?" "You chose this," he said. "You and Valerie, you almost handed everything to Michael, and I can't trust either of you anymore." Her mouth opened and closed. "But you're not welcome in my home," Dad said. "Not after this." And just like that, the woman who had spent her life manipulating people suddenly had nothing. She turned to me, her last hope. I shook my head and she finally understood. She turned and left, following after Valerie. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room broke. Guests started whispering. Some looked thrilled, like they had just witnessed the best drama of their lives. Others looked horrified. Michael stood slowly, wiping his bloody lip. He turned to me. "You believed in us," he sneered. "You wanted this." And finally, I felt nothing for him. I stepped closer, looked him dead in the eyes. "You are the biggest mistake I ever made," I said. He flinched, just a little. Then the man in the suit, the one who had started all of this, smiled. "Oh, by the way," he said casually, "the police should be here soon. Those fake documents? That's fraud." Michael froze. "What? You tried to steal from a man worth millions," the man said. "Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Michael panicked. He turned as it also lost every single person who had been holding me back. And when I finally went to bed that night, I slept better than I had in years, because for the first time in my life I was finally in control. The end.